at the end of the day, consumer would always sign up for one thing, convenience. If you can offer them convenience, they would definitely back you up. And that's not something that you see present with the long tail. They're more of a hands-on. They want to earn that 2.5%.
I think the future is about not just having more and more data, but having the ability to interpret that data in a manner that your real estate agent becomes a real estate expert.
There's one thing I'll tell you about agents, and it's here and it's everywhere around the world. They're quite loyal. If they see value in you, it's a big entry barrier, but once they're in for life.
Great. Welcome to today's episode of Couchonomics with Arjun. Joining me on the couch is an early stage founder. As you do know that every season, we dedicate a certain number of episodes to early stage founders. This time I have someone called Razwa joining me. She has founded or co-founded a startup called Nuzul. So with that, let me welcome Razwa to the couch in Riyadh. We're beaming in from Jeel, which is Riyadh Bank's innovation hub. So welcome.
Thank you for the opportunity, Arjun. It's my pleasure to be here.
Right. What did you do with your co-founder? Left him back?
Oh, yeah.
He's not invited?
Let's just say CTOs are a bit on the shy side.
Okay,
yeah.
Fair enough. I get that. So, Razwa, let's start with very simple question. I think the first thing which I want to do is for you to just introduce what is Nuzul, where did the inspiration come from? I think you've been around for about 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
Right? And I guess the most important question for me is, what problem are you solving?
Yeah, sure. So Nuzul is actually a Saudi startup, and we service the business side of things, so you can say B2B. The purpose of Nuzul mainly is to provide solutions and tools around 2 main pillars. The first being minimizing the manual labor around the processes, and the second is to reduce friction between the different stakeholders. So it all started about 3 years ago when I was looking for a property myself, and soon I realized that the process I was going through is actually identical to the one that my parents went through 24 years prior. And it was such an eye-opening experience, because how come 2 decades can go by without any progress or adoption in technology? So that's when I found Abdul Majid, my CTO, and we worked around a solution that obviously did not work, pivoted a couple of times until we have the platform that we have today as Nuzul.
Okay. And so the platform does what? It enables real estate agents to run their businesses?
Pretty much. So it's whatever they do on the day-to-day, whether they're agents, brokerage offices, or even developers, it digitizes the whole process. So we always try to present ourselves as their digital partners, so to speak, and they can focus on selling, on building, whatever they do best. They don't have to worry about technology. We got that side for them.
Okay. So simple terms, Shopify for real estate agents?
Pretty much, you can say that.
Okay, right. Now, you got to keep it simple for guys like us, right? And Shopify has done well, right? So you mentioned you pivoted a couple of times. Explain what those pivots were.
So we started as a marketplace. Obviously, any solution, especially around the real estate, you would think, oh, there's the supply, the demand is pretty clear, this is the solution, I can just focus on enhancing the experience. And that was quite arrogant from our end. We did not build close to the people that we were trying to service. So the first mistake was us trying to build for the consumer the demand side of things rather than the supply. We did build a marketplace as an app, and within the first week of launching, with 0 marketing, we had about 5,000 downloads. Both of us never had a startup prior to this, so it was quite a heavy number for us to deal with, but we soon realized that it's all coming from the demand side. We had no supply. So we worked for about 3 months, very close to agents, trying to analyze what is the problem? Why aren't you posting? Is there an issue with the supply itself? And it ended up where I quit my daytime job and I would actually go to work at these brokerage offices free of charge just to understand the process. So the pain did exist. They just weren't exactly able in articulating why were they living this pain. They just know the outcome of it. I'll give you a very simple example. So we were sitting at this office. A potential client walks in and she's like, hey, I'm new, I'm from Jeddah. I would like to move to Riyadh. Do you have anything within this area? And the guy would like, here's my WhatsApp number. Text me and I'll see the supply that I have. He could have closed the deal right then and there if he had access to the real estate inventory. But that wasn't possible because everything was on an Excel, on a laptop with someone who's not even in the office. So nothing was online. Everything existed on WhatsApp and Excel sheets and such. And we turned all of that into a simple button where all you need is to sell, access the inventory, for example, using the platform, and then you can close the deal immediately. So we just tried to stay on the side, witness the the problems, the processes, so on and so forth, and then record it and try to, let's say, we like to say Play-Doh. We use technology like Play-Doh, and it would fit exactly what kind of problems that they were suffering from and offer it as a solution.
Okay, so let's dwell a little bit deeper on this, right? So I'm familiar. There's a couple of things. So I'm very familiar with the likes of Property Finder, and back in the UAE we have even Bayut and so on and so forth, right? They, to a large extent, take care of the supply side identification, right?
Yes.
Because a number of people can come and post their properties on it, right? And people have access to Property Finder. I guess you go subscribe yourself. I do not know how it works. I'm not a real estate agent, but I'm just assuming. And you get access to Property Finder. Property Finder does some verification checks also. They have now introduced, others have introduced some other tools which are around property estimation, et cetera, so on and so forth. Did none of those exist here?
They do exist, and property estimation, just on the side, is one of the most difficult things you can possibly offer, but it has its own situation going around it. If we're talking about solution as a marketplace, yes, but you're talking about the conversation between the agents, the developers, and the consumers. How can they find each other? We're talking about specifically the supply itself. When it comes to the agents or the developers, how do they categorize it? How many do they have? What is the history? And when it comes to the demand, what areas do they work in? So there is a huge lack of data and data analysis on what they currently have. And all of it, like I said, is mainly offline. So they can't necessarily utilize it or even use it to help them make futuristic decisions. So let's say most of the demand that they have from their customers is for apartments, 150 square meters north of Riyadh. They would never realize that because the data is not recorded in a clean, accurate way where they can analyze it. So we're not talking about the selling part or the listing part. We're talking about everything that comes right before that.
Okay, all right. So let's take Shopify as the base here, because I do understand Shopify fairly well, right? Are you automating or digitizing, if that's the right word, the entire journey of what a real estate agent needs to go, both from a supply and demand side? So in effect, you're giving them a platform that somebody can actually go in and set up their business on top of your platform, or is it different?
So I love this question. It's a beautiful question because we can break it into two different segments. If we take the Shopify model, we're talking about, you said the word automation. We try to shy away from the word automation because it introduces a very scary thought for agents, which is them being replaced by technology. Automation mainly meaning removing the human factor to a certain extent and replacing it with technology or robots, so on and so forth. We focus on augmentation. So it means taking the current processes, what humans really do, and then trying to enhance it with technology. And when you talk about Shopify, the Shopify model, the beauty of it is that it works for existing brick and mortar as well as fully digital online stores. And with that, we can replicate it specifically for the real estate sector. And if we're able to mirror it, you would say inventory management. Here we have showing an inventory for your listings specifically. For the delivery, you can have down payments, financial planning. So everything that can be done for a brick and mortar shops, you can also do it for real estate brokerages, offices, so on and so forth. If you come and say what stops marketplaces from replicating the same model, I would say because they're somewhat competing over the same customer. So who are you trying to target as a marketplace? You want consumers to come in, look around, and try to purchase from the agents who are subscribed with you. Now, if you go and target the agents themselves trying to sell for those said consumers, you're all competing over the same cake, so to speak. But for us, we don't go for the end consumer. We're more focused on the agents themselves.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to come back to the whole automation piece because I think with all this stuff around AI, the fact of the matter is real estate agents should be freaking out if they aren't, But because that whole point that selling properties and art and not a science is not entirely true. Let me come back to that. The question then, so you made it very clear. You have a platform. It's a B2B play. Real estate selling is, broken, has always been broken, largely because it serves the purpose of a number of players who play in that sector to a large extent.
Partially, yeah.
It's highly fragmented, right? And especially in a country like Saudi Arabia, where actually real estate is now sort of emerging as a sector by itself. Obviously, people have been buying and selling real estate for as long as the kingdom's been around, but now you're opening up. How do you go aggregating such a fragmented sector?
Okay. Well, since we're talking about it within the context of Saudi, what a lot of people don't realize, it's actually the second largest contributor to the economy, second only to oil. And as you have said, it has been running with zero regulations. Up until 2017, the Real Estate General Authority, who's the regulator of the space, didn't even exist. And the first actual brokerage law didn't go into effect until 2023. What does that mean for us? It means Nuzul could not have existed before 2023 because the adoption to said technologies was impossible. Now, your question is something that is always being discussed within certain circles, within real estate and specifically within PropTech. How do you put together a fragmented sector? And you start with regulations. Now, the Real Estate General Authority, for example, you cannot be an agent today without being licensed. And the only way to get your license is online. There isn't any kind of office that you could walk into, get your training, and then receive your license. That means adoption to technology specifically has immensely increased because you have to use it. From there, once that first wall has fallen, you get into, okay, I'm online now. What is the next step for me? I see other people online. I can create my own website. Wait, are you telling me that I can take my commission fully digital? Let me play around with it. So once that foundation of trust, because you have governmental entities playing around it and actually encouraging it, things become a bit easier.
Okay. So how do you go and capture these customers?
Specifically for Nuzul?
Yeah.
Well, the idea of the Shopify model is not new, but it's certainly new for this specific sector here.
Yep.
So it's about categorizing it in the right way, presenting ourselves as, like I said earlier, your digital partner rather than a competitor. And then you just try to sell benefits across different segments. What do I mean by that? When we come to a very simple, let's say, a brokerage office, 3 to 4 people who are working there versus a fully functional company with over 500 people. If you break it down to it, stripping down the processes itself, it's human-centric, whether you're 500 people or 4 people. With it being human-centric, that means there will always be friction. And that friction comes within the processes themselves. So if you try to sell things like, let's say, data analysis, unless you sell it to those people who are doing the processes in a way where it can make their job easier, the whole data analysis means absolutely nothing. So you start by segmenting this fragmented market. What is your outcome of this data analysis? Is it to make better investment decisions? Then you're talking to family offices, you're talking to developers, you're talking to certain departments within those companies. Are you talking about data analysis that would help me get closer to my client through digital marketing? How can I turn it into actual simplified tools using a language that you and I understand and can actually act on? So you take all of this fragmented market, you break it down into these recognized categories, and then you sell the tools based on their needs, not based on what you have.
Okay, but Razwa, you just talked about a huge segment, right? There's as you said, a 500 man or woman powered brokerage house, and then there's Arjun and his 3 merry men trying to sell, right? I would imagine there's greater demand, and correct me, coming out of the Arjun and his merry men, because these are the guys and girls who really don't have that much exposure to, I guess, technology, don't have the right amount of capital, cannot replicate some of the stuff that Nuzul might have to offer.
Yeah.
If you're on the other side of the equation, if you're the 500-man operation, you might want this to be more proprietary. And I think it's no different than how Shopify initially began, right?
Definitely.
Shopify aggregated the long tail, right?
Yeah.
So are you focused more on the long tail and getting these people, into the, if I may say, into the full digital economy?
Yeah.
Or are you saying, no, let's go after these, 10, 15, 20 big players, right? And because getting each of these is substantial,
Yeah.
right? Because you get, 500 into one. So where, you've got to have some area where you're going to pick your bets, right? You can't go everywhere.
Definitely. Yes.
So where are you picking the bets then?
So we actually started with the long tail, as you
Right.
just called it. Why? Because it was easier for us. No one was targeting this segment of the market. Everyone wouldn't even touch it with a stick. It was too complicated. People are quite stubborn with their ways. You're talking about decades and decades of traditional processes. So that's where we decided to start. Because it was easier to sell for them, no one else was selling. And because of the price range, so we can test a lot, we can change our prices a lot, and we were new in the game. Surprisingly so, within the first 6 months of us targeting this segment, the other segments started to reach out to us.
Okay.
And we're talking specifically about new offices with great funding who do not want to go through the traditional ways of reaching out to companies such as SAP, for example, or HubSpot, or so on and so forth. That's somewhat international, and it's not necessarily localized CRM for the regulations that we have here, and that's what we offer. The integration with relevant government entities, it's something as simple as a click of a button with Nuzul, and that's where we really compete with them.
Okay. All right. Let's take a step back, right? I think it'll be worth painting a picture. Talk to me a little bit about the real estate sector. How is the real estate sector evolving here? Where are you actually seeing the big challenges and the opportunities
Yeah.
in terms of real estate? And if you want, let's focus on residential real estate, because I'm assuming that's where you kind of focus your energy, or you're agnostic to both residential and commercial?
We're very agnostic. We even do industrial. Some of our clients do hospitals, gas stations. It's
Okay.
actually quite interesting.
So paint me a picture. How's the real estate sector evolving in the kingdom? Where are the pockets of opportunities? Where are some of the big challenges? And what are those?
Sure. So it's no secret that most of the sector is being driven by Vision 2030, specifically with a certain focus, if we're talking about real estate, on tourism, on housing, and infrastructure. With that being said, however, there are a lot of opportunities if we're taking a step away from technology, so to speak. There are a lot of opportunities when you're talking about the processes themselves. So the way things operate today is they used to be very fragmented in the sense of if you had a good amount of money and you wanted to invest, you can just hook up a developer. They would build 6 to 7 villas for you and you would sell it directly. You don't necessarily require a license for that. All you need is funding. And you would sell it as personally built because you developed the plan yourself. You don't even need the stamp of an architect or an office. The developer would take all the charge for that, or the responsibility, if I may say. That is not here anymore. So you would see more large players are coming into play, developers, whether through the National Housing Company or other entities, and they would develop projects with hundreds of units in them, Dir'iyya, Roshan, so on and so forth. And now with that happening, you see that the brokerages and the offices, people stopped doing it as a part-time thing and it became a full-time thing. Why? Because it's consolidating. All of these big developers who are providing X number of units would want to work directly with professional companies who would just help them get rid of the supply. And you can't really do that with individuals. So you see a little bit of proficiency being added, or professionalism, if I may say, being added into this ecosystem. So things are falling into place. Things are really growing with the help of the regulations, of course, but also the way things are being done, the units that are being built, the opportunities and the projects that are happening. With that being said, we also have to look into the consumer's side. So accessing such projects, you would have to talk either directly to the developer, look for these opportunities, or source it out through the agent who you would hope has the right connections to these projects. So there is a lot of opportunity also when it comes to addressing the consumer's needs away from the marketplace model. So at Nuzul, we don't believe in the marketplace model at all. We think it's something that technology sort of inherited, and we're pushing for more driving away from your question, but it's something that's very important for us because people take it at face value. Like marketplace is always the solution, whether it be it in property, whether it be it in tourism, Airbnb. It's always about the marketplace, and that puts the labor down with the customers themselves. You would have to do the benchmarking, you would have to do the comparisons, you would have to do all of the work just to get to a point where you're also the one who's paying. And that just doesn't make sense at its core. So I believe in more of a concierge service without the concierge price tag. With the professional developers coming into play, with the professional brokerage offices also coming into play, it only makes sense for the consumer's services to also rise up to the occasion and deliver such service.
Okay, right. So I kind of get that. But I still believe that while all this professionalism will come in, the long tail won't go away. Right?
Definitely not.
And we've seen this in, highly, I guess, if I may say, organized markets in different parts of the world. The long tail won't go away.
But it would be more of a niche.
You think
rather
it would
than
be,
anything.
You think it would be the niche?
Definitely, it would be more of a niche.
Because won't actually the long tail just migrate? I think there's a lot of concentration right now, if I may say, to a few mega centers in Saudi Arabia. But actually, the population lives. I know Riyadh accounts for a very significant percentage of the overall population.
Yeah.
But as the country grows, I think you do see a little bit more fragmentation or more spreading out of the population. So the long tail. Also, doesn't the long tail start to assume a different role, which they go into more of an introducer model? Do you not see that coming through?
Well, that's what I mean by a niche. I mean, they're going to hold a certain side of this whole ecosystem rather than them being your average, connecting the average agent for the buyer and the average agent for the seller. They would be more of a second market agent, or they would be more of a specific, let's say, industrial real estate kind of agent. But they wouldn't be as readily available because that's going to be, to a certain extent, reserved for better services in cooperation with technology. So at the end of the day, consumer would always sign up for one thing: convenience. If you can offer them convenience, they would definitely back you up. And that's not something that you see present with the long tail. They're more of a hands-on. They want to earn that 2.5%. So I think definitely they're going to end up being in a niche somewhere.
So this is very interesting, right? Because this is where I think you diverge away from the Shopify model. Because in e-commerce, the long tail has existed, actually has grown, right? Because people like the artisanal side of stuff, right? Real estate is not the same because in a lot of ways, real estate is, as you're saying, is getting concentrated in terms of who provides the supply. And so therefore, the big players come in as middlemen, if I may want to use that term, or middle women, just to be politically correct, right? So if I'm a betting man, I guess Nuzul then has to run up market very quickly, get hold of as many of these large players and sort of say, we're your platform of choice on which to build your business. So the long tail stops being important because the product also then spreads segments into two. One is highly customized. The other is, if I may say, I guess, highly automated or predictive. Is that too premature for me to pass that statement, or is that already happening?
Not at all. So it's a continuous discussion that my co-founder and I have, and we had it since day one. We said, Nuzul, the way that exists today, which is the Shopify model, is not the unicorn, and we are fully aware of it. But we still built it because it was the easiest way to infiltrate the market. No one was servicing this segment, and it would give us the right understanding to build a foundation to launch where we go from there.
Yeah, agree.
Which I just touched on a little bit, which is just we think about the whole marketplace model. Because even if you consider the whole suppliers consolidating and only few players at play, the marketplace model kind of becomes useless. You would want something that's customized for each customer, and you can't do that without the right data. And we think the way that Shopify model has today enables us to access such data.
Okay, couple of points now. So let's talk a little bit about Shopify. Now, what makes Shopify is exceptional? I don't know if you know this, but more than 60 or if not 70% of Shopify's actually income now comes out of the non-marketplace offering. It actually comes out of financial services and the value-added services that you're offering. How's Nuzul sort of expanding in its product evolution? What are the segues that you're seeing where you feel you need to double down and sort of further develop either proprietary tech or through partnerships?
Well, we've been lucky enough this year to explore a little bit within this, and we have expanded into two spheres that I would say is real estate market adjacent. First is being tourism, and the second is payments and transactions. And I'll deep dive into each one of those. So for the tourism, we noticed about 15% of our users have been using our platform, the CRM, the services a little bit abnormally. And when I say abnormally, they've been requesting things that a typical agent would not request. So we did a little bit of research, spoke to them, and we realized they're actually hosts for short-term rentals.
Okay.
They would come to us and say, I can list on all of these different places, Airbnb, Booking, so on and so forth. But what comes right before that? I need a system where I can put all of these properties together. I need to have a clear head count. When did I do the last maintenance, the location, the number of the person who's in charge of it, so on and so forth. And we don't have that. So we've been playing makeshift with the Nuzul CRM to make it work. And what we did is we took 80% of the code, changed a bit of 20%, and we called it Nuzul Siyaha, which means Nuzul Tourism.
Okay.
And we launched it for the segment, and it has been taking off all organically, surprisingly so. The second part with the payments and the transactions is, aside from the typical obvious solution, which is you can have your commission online, you don't need the accountant to run it through. Some of the largest developers today, you would still have to show up to the location with an actual check so that you could reserve the apartment, which, if you ask me in 2024, that doesn't really make much sense, but it is what it is. Aside from the obvious, we wanted to be enablers for these professionals. And what I mean by that is a lot of the brokerage offices or even developers offer ad hoc services. And what I mean by that are things like, let's say, pricing for properties, authentication, certain contracts, offering you filming or staging for your housing, so on and so forth. They can offer it as a button on their website with Nuzul, name it whatever they want, and price it whatever they want. And we just give them that flexibility of just supporting their day-to-day. Again, focus on the selling, and we're just there to support them digitally.
No, I get it, right? So so for my sins, because there you go. It shows my age here. I've spent most of my life in financial services. An area where I spent a lot of my time was actually mortgages, right? And what was quite interesting was that the more you actually got into mortgages, the more you got into understanding the history of the life cycle of how real estate or property is dealt with, right? So the journey actually starts a lot before a property is bought, and in some circumstances, actually, people's journey first starts from a financial services journey where they actually legitimize themselves to an extent to saying, will I be able to afford a property? And I'm talking about purchases, not rentals, right?
Yeah.
And then comes in the real estate purchase side, and then there's this whole sort of to and fro with the mortgage company, which is quite painful, let's be honest, right? Because you're trying to triangulate several parties, right? And it's a wry mess. And I think one of the things that real estate selling and buying has not really advanced in 20 years is because of a number of different stakeholders who don't necessarily all trust each other, right? There are certain reputations that real estate agents have in the marketplace. Banks have certain and are wary of it. And then what's very interesting is that once the event is over, which is the purchase event, there's actually a life cycle management, which is post-event, right?
Yeah.
But actually, unfortunately, the real estate agents don't play much of a role when they should, right? Because there is actually money to be made in terms of managing, maintaining, and sort of growing your property. But people tend to sort of use it in a very transactional manner, and then they start calling you 3 years later to say, hey, do you want to flip your property?
Yeah.
And I'll sell you something, which doesn't work. So is the intention for you to actually follow that entire customer journey? Because there are two ways to look at your business, right? One is to look at it from my perspective, i.e. a buyer's perspective, and say, let's map the buyer's journey and build technology to support the buyer's journey, but from a real estate agent's perspective. Or go down the real estate agent's perspective and say, let's look at everything they do and you said augment, right? Let's augment all of it.
Yeah.
What's the angle that you guys have taken?
So we're firm believers of the fact that the real estate, you cannot take the human factor from the real estate process. That's just not something that's possible. It will always be human-centric. With that being said, there are a lot of areas where you can definitely enhance in terms of transparency as well as being aware. So previously or traditionally, only certain stakeholders within this process had access to absolutely integral information when it comes to the purchasing or the property itself. Lack of information, lack of awareness within this whole process, increasing the transparency would solve, I would say it would solve about 60% of the problems that you just mentioned. So it's not really up for us to decide which end of the tail do we actually capture and then release products for. Because like I said, one of the main pillars that we're building for is minimizing the friction between the different stakeholders.
Okay.
And the way that we do that is by trying to view things from all these different point of views. So not necessarily going into the mortgage and financing side of things, but mainly focusing on the professional, the businesses, as well as the consumers. And how can we enhance the relationship between the two, specifically using data. So the data would enable the consumer end to make an informed decision, but also allow for the agents to promote and reach the right clients. So instead of one side trying to deceive the other and the other one's running away, we're just trying to find a point in the middle and being that middleman for them, being like, hey, if you're looking for, let's just say, a noisy property, it's in the middle of the city, and it can be painted within that light. You can start promoting it for a younger person who's actually would love to be in the middle of a vibrant area. And it's just about the positioning. It's about using the right language and allowing the data itself to speak for that objectively, and then bringing in the other parties into it. Not really touching on the aspect of like financing or mortgages or all of that.
Okay, so I've got a couple of questions on that, right? So as you said, right, one of the biggest areas, or I guess the biggest waste of effort for any real estate agent is lead qualification.
Correct.
Right? The second area where I think the biggest debate actually ever happens for a real estate agent is pricing of the property, right? Which is you said the property estimation. The third area, which is what you just said, is I've got a whole host of potential clients. What is the best property to match them, which is the example that you gave, right? So I see these as discrete moves. And then my fourth question, so let me ask you, is that, so are these all independent products that you're building as we speak? Because I guess these are important touch points for the real estate agent, right? And then my question is, where are you generating all this data from? So what are your sources of data which allows you to build these, if I may say, responses to use cases?
So I wouldn't say it's different products. I would say it's different data entry points that would inform the same product. At the end of the day, the result is the same. Someone would like to purchase and someone would like to sell. And there is the agent who either represents either side of those. Now, the different data points that we collect depends on what are we collecting. So there are some open data source provided by the government. There are sources such as the Real Estate Registry, which is a PIF company. What they have been doing today is digitizing the title deeds. So today, any title deed can be received digitally. You don't have to go into any court or sign into any papers, and you can do that all digitally, even wiring the whole amount via the bank. So utilizing all these different data points to make sure that the goal is the same for all parties involved, which brings us back to this whole concierge model, where what is the right property for me as a person who's interested? Maybe I'm not even purchasing for myself, maybe I want it as an investment. And utilizing the technology and where we have reached today, we have touched a little bit on AI, and utilizing that so that we can reach that outcome where the labor of the search and the customization does not fall on you as the person who's interested in purchasing, and it does not fall on the agent. The agent wants to sell and you want to purchase. The technology and the data would come in and solve for that.
Okay. And what is the aversion towards, I'm sorry, I'm using an emotive word here, towards getting into the mortgage world? Because I guess that's where the big money is.
That is where the big money is, and I'm
not suggesting you become a lender, but why wouldn't you solve for that?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's an aversion per se, but I would say caution more than anything. It definitely comes from a lack of understanding and a lack of experience within that sector. So I come from an architectural engineering background. Our CTO, Abdul Majid, has over 15 years of experience in tech in a lot of reputable companies and entities. Between the two of us, these are our strengths. So if at some point we're willing to consider it as an option for us, we definitely need experts within our team to really make a difference. For now, I think we need to focus on cementing our name and our services and further understand the process and where everything falls before we really offer it as a layer, a supporting layer, so to speak.
Okay. You talked about expertise, right? So who has the expertise to kind of, I say, convince the unconvinceables here? Because
So everyone, basically,
yeah.
everyone is unconvinciable.
Well, I would imagine, so so I don't know many real estate agents. I don't know why, but I don't. So I'll give you my example. I've just gone through a process of buying a property in somewhere in Europe, right?
Mhm.
It's a vacation home, whatever you want to call it, and it's incredible. Every single agent I met there thinks that they are, God's gift to the world of artists, right? It's all about personalities. It's all about the art of selling. Where actually, to be honest with you, unfortunately, I'm a very left brain kind of guy who has sort of has rows and columns and sort of puts everything in it, and it's a very sort of logical process for me. How do you guys convince these guys that they need the technology more than they think they do, right? And especially right now where you're actually taking care of the long tail, as I say,
Yeah.
right?
Do you
How
want
do you do
the
that?
truth or do you want the
No,
salesy answer?
obviously, I want the truth, but not at the cost of undermining what you're trying to do.
No,
Right?
not
Yeah.
at all. So we
How do you incentivize them?
we don't sell the technology.
Right.
We don't sell the technology. We sell the results.
Okay.
And it has been quite difficult for us because it's a very, very old market. It's quite traditional. They have their own terminology around it. Specifically here in Saudi, they have their own groups around it. But there's one thing I'll tell you about agents, and it's here and it's everywhere around the world. They're quite loyal. If they see value in you, it's a big, I would say, entry barrier, so to speak. But once they're in for life. And the way
Lazy, loud, and loyal, but that's
I mean, there are clients, so. So what we try to focus on is just identify the weaknesses away from the technology. What is happening today that makes them feel undermined, not necessarily empowered? And for us, we came at a time where it was perfect because we saw a very clear gap that we can solve for, which is a disconnect between the regulations that are taking place because it was quite new. No one was fully understanding what was going on, how to go about it, a lack of trust, and where everyone was operating as agents and as offices. And that's how we positioned ourselves as the middleman between the two. And the way we did it is we created a monthly event where we would bring, as we would like to call them, market movers, people who are experts within a specific niche within the real estate market, a lot of regulators, head of departments, head of entities, and we would host this whole thing for free, broadcast it. It's open for the public, specifically for real estate agents and developers. And we would bridge that gap between the regulations, what is actually going on, simplifying where are the regulators coming from, and the point of view and the perspective of the people who have to comply. And it opened some of the most beautiful, intriguing conversations that we haven't seen.
the voice of the customer is incredible.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And just witnessing these conversations firsthand happening gave us as Nuzul a lot of insights on A, where things are going, and B, are people happy about it or not? And if not, what can we do? What can we offer as someone who operates in the private sector? How can we bridge that gap for them as well?
Okay, so before I get into talking about the future, and I'm going to talk a bit about these emerging technologies, and you can obviously choose to respond or not. Where are you on your journey in terms of, let me ask, so in terms of numbers, as long as you're comfortable sharing, you've been going for a few years, you've pivoted a few times. What's the user base looking like? How, how rapidly are you growing?
Yeah.
Where are you on your funding journey? How many rounds have you been through? What are you comfortable sharing at this stage?
All of it. We're
Okay.
very transparent. We
So-
try to mimic
so
what we
go for
sell.
it.
So
Because use this as your platform, right? God knows
Sure.
who's listening. So
yeah, sure. So we actually started the company in August of 2022. Started building the marketplace launched it in January of 2023. That's when we got our first 5,000 downloads, realized the issue, and then we pivoted. Between understanding what was wrong with the market, building the actual solution after the pivot, we relaunched in September 2023. Okay. And that's the Nuzul, the way it exists today, the fully functional platform. So between September 2023 and today, which is a little over a year, I would say a year and a few months, we went from 0 customers to 3,000.
Okay.
And the adoption of technology.
And these are 3,000 users?
Yes.
Okay. Right.
And with almost zero marketing. So we're very active on social media. We don't believe in traditional marketing. And when I say traditional marketing, I mean like the signs on the streets or the SMS messages and all of that. We just believe in talking directly to our consumers, doing that monthly event that I just mentioned, as well as just existing within the same spaces, the same spheres. We go to them, they don't come to us kind of mentality. We have closed our pre-seed round in September 2023, and we have our seed round currently open, 70% already closed.
Excellent.
Yes.
How much are you raising?
About 5 million.
And is your valuation public or you?
No, it's not public.
Okay. Well, we're not going to force you on that. Okay, so that's good. So pre-seed done, you're in your seed round, 70% up, 3,000 customers and counting.
Yes.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the future, right? So let me first pose the question, which is the inevitable question in every conversation, which is associated with AI, right?
Okay.
So you're in the data game, right? And as more and more data becomes available and AI advances and, everybody's talking about, agentic AI and, autonomous AI, right? For me, the real need for a real estate agent starts to go away, right?
Yeah.
And I'm talking obviously extremities,
Yeah.
right? Because like in the banking sector, a lot of that trust was built at a level of the trust of the entity or the trust of the individual, right? I grew up in London. We used to have something called the man from the Prudential. Someone used to come home. He knew your family for 2 generations.
Interesting.
He or she would sell you the insurance policy and everything else, and
Wow.
you trusted the individual.
Okay.
And that's kind of how the world evolved, right? And everywhere in the world was the same. I'm sure the kingdom was no different 20, 30 years ago.
Okay.
Right. Okay. You get perfect data. You start getting AI, which has no bias, arguably, right? The trust and this autonomous agent, right, doesn't have to be a corporate autonomous agent. It could be your own. Right?
Yeah.
It could be your digital avatar who acts in your best interest.
Yeah.
Right? All of this starts to come together in terms of data, and this autonomous agent starts to make decisions for you, which are perfect in nature.
Yes.
Right? Because you're able to tell them what you want at a much more granular level. Is this something that it's starting to bother you guys, or you feel that this is 5 to 10 years away and we don't really care about it? Or are you already building the way your platforms are being built? You're building it as what I call AI ready. So every generation of AI which comes in, you're able to sort of plug it in, I guess, seamlessly. There's nothing seamless in life, but you get the drift.
No, we definitely recognize the role of AI and the power it has, specifically in the real estate sector, because you have a large amount of data to work around, a lot of analysis, especially with people who are first-time buyers or family or someone who wants to upgrade. Even first-time investors can be quite scary for them. And if they can look at a platform that offers them certain results with certain data, with certain guarantees, if I may say, it would make them way more comfortable than dealing directly with an agent. However, with that being said, they would still require the existence of, I would say, an expert rather than an agent. So maybe their role would shift the more AI is being introduced, and they go from a middleman into an expert level or a consultant kind of level, where they have experiences to hold such consumers who are first time around or looking for something specific, and really help bridge the gap between what they need, the data that is being offered from the AI, and that's where they really come in. Regardless of how much information the AI gives you, it still needs to be quite specific. And if you think about it, you can even compare it, let's say, to the medicine industry. If you can just look up whatever's wrong with you, you'll get all of these different diagnostics, and unless you talk to a trusted doctor that tells you what it is and how it goes, only then that you would actually make the purchase of the medicine or start to feel better or whatever it is. I say that's quite similar to the real estate industry because it's a large ticket item and it's a purchase for life, or it could be a big investment for you. So it's not as easily of a decision as the e-commerce world, so to speak.
It's a good argument. I think it's a good argument. It stacks up because there is a certain sort of risk with getting it wrong. But my view is, and I think you've answered the question, which is I think the future is about not just having more and more data, but having the ability to interpret that data in a manner that your real estate agent becomes a real estate expert.
It's not about the amount of
That would be a
data.
scary thought, getting cards which says I'm a real estate expert. I'm sure some of them have out there. Let me ask you a second question around emerging technologies, and I think this is something which I personally think has a huge impact, which is the introduction of blockchain, right? So from a perspective of tokenizing,
Yes.
right? From the perspective, so one of the things you will immediately benefit from is the immutability of deeds, right?
Yes.
Once you start putting them on the blockchain, it becomes reliable data. Anything which is reliable is great for platforms like you, right?
Definitely.
But then comes in this whole concept of tokenizing of real world assets, right? And that is actually quite a tricky area because I don't think it's the technology which is holding us back. I think it's the legal frameworks don't really fully exist, right? Is that, again, an area that you guys are looking at and saying that this could be incredibly interesting? Because, in effect, you start to tokenize real estate becomes highly liquid,
Yes.
which is currently illiquid. Therefore, the role of the real estate agents completely change, right, arguably, and then they'll need more technology like you guys offer. Is this something which is currently, again, you're saying we'll wait, because regulation has to come in, right? And there's no regulation in this case. But is that something you guys are thinking about today? Because these things they'll come very quickly, like technology does, and to build this technology is not going to be very quick, right? You'll have to respond to it. So where are you guys with thoughts like this?
So it is an area that we are extremely interested in, and we have been lucky enough to just put things into context. We won the PIF PropTech competition a few weeks ago.
Okay.
With over 1,200 entries globally.
Wow.
And there were only top 5 winners, and we were one of the top 5 winners. It was run by Couchonomics, which is the tech arm for Neom. And the idea behind it is that they want to take these technologies that directly relates to PropTech and give them a space to build, to imagine, and then regulations will follow. And that's the exact domain that we're holding and we're playing around with. The tokenization of real estate. Now, you're talking about digitizing the real world, but in a sense, the two are going to merge inevitably with time. So there isn't going to be specifically the digital world and the real world to a certain extent. I mean, if you want to benchmark it on an existing example that a lot of people just gloss over, so to speak, look at stocks. What are they really? You're getting an ownership in a company with X value. And if you can apply the same concept on real estate with specific regulations, with specific identification. So we can take an example if you want. An operating hotel with X amount of revenue. And what you're tokenizing is not necessarily the actual brick and mortar, but the revenue of that hotel. And with the blockchain technology, you can just basically identify at what point did you sell, at what point did you buy, so on and so forth. So it's just about getting the framework right and having the opportunity to create that framework accurately so that all stakeholders can benefit from it.
Yeah.
There are obviously some reservations around it, especially when it comes to the blockchain technology. It relies heavily on the screening of identities. There are a lot of concerns around that, understandably so, but there's always a way around it.
I'm not concerned about that at all. I think legal frameworks will come out
Yeah.
too. I'm the biggest believer in tokenization of real world assets, specifically for the retail market, because I think it'll open up. And I think we'll start with financial securities, which is what I think where you're starting to see bonds and sukuks and private equity funds. And some of these private equity funds will be into real estate and so on and so forth. But then they move to real world assets and industrial assets and so on and so forth. And I think it grows. I think the whole real estate sector will actually have a huge moment, right, in my humble opinion.
Yeah.
Not necessarily from an institutional buyer's perspective, but from a retail buyer's perspective. And I think that's where greater organization will be required of the so-called middlemen and experts. My
Yeah.
humble opinion, but what would I
And
do?
if we can just draw some parallels here, in the financial industry, Tabi and Tamara lived a very similar situation where they were ready, they were up and they were operational. And once the regulations here was ready, they just simply entered the market and everything was up and running for them. And that's kind of how we draw ourselves within the sphere where we can be ready, we can have the framework to a certain extent exist, have a couple of trials under the right umbrella, the right authority, and from there, once everything's up and running, we can just launch the product.
Okay. My last question will come to you shortly. But before that, I'm going to do something I've never done in a show before, which
Okay.
is I'm actually going to suggest that you need to consider financial services earlier than you are thinking.
Okay.
Because, in my humble opinion, and again, you can walk out of this room and never care about what I have to say, but I think one of the biggest moats that you can build, and I think it goes back to the point that you made, that a real estate is actually a significant transaction.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the day, it's not just a transaction of dreams,
Yeah.
which is what buying real estate sometimes feels like, unless you're buying some industrial plot in the middle of nowhere. I think it's a financial transaction. And I
Yeah.
think that moat that you can build through actually working with financial services players, and again, I'm not trying to give anybody a plug here, but I think there is enough innovation now coming out of the banking world
Mm-hmm.
who would love to work with platforms like you,
Yeah.
right, where they can actually, democratize the access to their financial products.
Mm-hmm.
And trust me, it'll mean a lot to you.
Yeah.
Explore it before, and you don't need any expert.
Okay.
Trust me, you're smart enough. Your co-founder is smart enough. I haven't met him. There's enough expertise lying on the other side of the equation. Do that. Last question. Where do you guys go next? What's the plan? Obviously, you do the capital raise and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
What are you going to do with all that money you're raising? Holidays in the Riviera, or but on a more serious note, where are you heading next with Nuzul over the next 12 to 18 months?
So we're mainly focused on addressing three main concerns. First is the relationship between the consumer and the businesses. Second is offering, or at least challenging, the traditional ways people find their properties today. Like I said, moving away from marketplaces and such, just at least kind of proof ideas around it. And lastly, a work on the pricing model. The pricing model is inherently broken, not just in Saudi, but globally speaking. The reliance on the human factor of it is very scary in a sense, and it leads to a lot of false data.
So pricing, you mean valuation?
Valuation
Okay.
of the
All right.
properties. And we do see the value of the financial aspect of it feeding back into the pricing model and the valuation of properties. But we want to look at it in terms of how can it be done with eliminating the human side of it or the expert side of it, where you rely 100% on data. Of course, the data would have to be clean, immediate. A lot of factors would have to work around it, but it's something that needs to be addressed as soon as possible.
So here's something I do quite often. Do you know of a company called Prop.ai?
I've heard of them.
All right. So they were on my show
Okay.
earlier this year, right? Run by an equally smart female founder like you. Her name is Raneem. I think you should call each other, or
Okay.
more importantly, or more easily, I'll connect you both. That's what they focus on.
Okay.
So they basically focus on, I guess they do a lot more than just that. But one of the core areas with them is that they are able to give you educated, data-driven valuation
Interesting.
on properties, including where the properties would trend, which developer performs better than the others in certain areas, and so on and so forth. I think they are in their process of entering the kingdom. They established themselves in the UAE
That's
first.
great.
So, who knows? You both could sort of, dance together, because I think
Would
you
love
guys have
to.
complementary offerings. Thank you for coming, Razwa. I hope this was useful. I've heard a few more things about PropTech, because to be honest with you, when PropTech came around to me about a year or two ago, I was like, well, there goes another buzzword, because everything needs to have tech. But I do understand. I think there is some very, very interesting, and PropTech is huge.
It's huge.
It's massive, right? Because in the application of technology in property is what PropTech is. So
Yeah.
it's interesting. I think you got introduced to me through Iyad, who
Yeah.
I have a lot of time for with Flat Six Labs, and he was like,
Great guy.
he's a
Flat Six Labs is actually one of our investors. So.
right,
Yeah.
in the early stage space,
Mhm.
I'm sure. They are the biggest, I think the largest in terms of number of investments they've made in the region over the last few
Okay.
years. No, he mentioned, he's like, talk to them. And when he started giving, a flavor of your business, I'm like, this sounds more like Shopify. And he's like, yeah, but don't call them that. I said, no, I won't call them. But I said, I'm sorry I used that word.
I actually don't mind it. The concern is with my CTO. He doesn't like benchmarking against other companies, but I find it the easiest way to reach people.
Communicating is very important. And if
Exactly.
you can use a name which does not compete with you, but
Exactly.
actually spells out to a large extent what you're doing.
Even if it's one that competes with you, as long as it delivers the message,
Well,
you
that's
exist
true.
in the same space.
That's
so
true. That's
yeah,
true. You do.
yeah.
You do. So thank you for
No,
coming in.
It was a
Right.
pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And best of luck with the next 12, 18 months and 5 years ahead. And I hope you can convert the unconvertibles, as we might want to call them.
We
right?
should have a recap then.
Right. Well, who knows, right? Maybe if I have another season, we'll have you back there, right?
All right.
So, ladies and
Thank
gentlemen, that was Razwa, who's the founder or co-founder, sorry, of Nuzul. She's taken on a big challenge, which is, I guess, organizing the real estate sector of the kingdom, which is currently just growing leaps and bounds, because every time I meet my friends, they keep telling me how their property prices have sort of doubled, quadrupled, and so on and so forth over the last year and so. So with that, I'll say goodbye and see you next week. Bye.